Hello and welcome to Aunt Christina's baking class. Today we're going to talk about baking soda and baking powder. I'm sure you're familiar with both of these items. However, they probably don't look like this, what you're used to seeing. Your baking powder is probably in a small canister, maybe about the size of this can, and your baking soda may be in a small box. But they're the same thing. This is just larger quantities because I buy bigger quantities because I use a lot. As you can see, I'm already halfway through this jar. Okay, so baking soda, we have to look at the ingredients to learn what these items are and figure out how they work in cake and other baked goods. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. That's the scientific name. Sodium means it's a type of salt. Bicarbonate means it has two carbon atoms. It's a naturally occurring mineral. It comes from rocks, and not all rocks, specific ones. And they grind it down or turn it into this powder that we use for cleaning and for baking. You generally will find the baking soda in chocolate chip cookie recipes, but occasionally alongside baking powder in a cake recipe. Baking powder is sodium acid phosphate, sodium bicarbonate. What? Same thing. Cornstarch and monocalcium phosphate. I'm sure your mama buys the aluminum-free baking powder as well. There are some cheaper baking powders that have aluminum in them, but we don't use those because of the side effects of aluminum. So your ingredients, if you have the aluminum free, should be pretty similar to mine, if they're not exactly the same. The reason why there are multiple ingredients in baking powder is because it is specifically used as a raising agent in your cake. When you do not add baking powder to a cake recipe, the cake will bake out very dense, very thick, probably kind of chewy or hard, and it's just not a pleasant thing to eat. So we add baking powder to add air, create fluffiness, and make the cake rise up. That's why you'll see as your cake bakes, your batter starts, halfway up the pan. After it's done, the cake is all the way full in the pan. That's the result of baking powder. Now, on the scientific side of this, there are two categories that most elements fall into, and that's acids and bases. An acid is pretty self-explanatory for the most part. Think of things that can melt or burn or almost be bad. They can be negative. Whereas a base is more of a flat, cooling type of element. What determines whether something is an acid or a base is called the pH level. And later on, we will get some pH test strips and do some fun experiments in learning how to test for acids and bases. What you need to know right now for this video and this concept is that acids and bases work together to negate one another. It's kind of like how water puts out a fire, a base will put out or neutralize an acid. Baking soda is a base. So that is why it is good for heartburn. When people get stomach acid up in their throat and they have heartburn or reflux, you can put baking soda in a little bit of water and drink it, and the baking soda will neutralize that acid that's in your stomach that's overactive. You notice that the baking powder, it has that base. It also has sodium acid phosphate. So it's another salt, but it's an acid, and it's a phosphate. Or sorry, it's a pyrophosphate. I wasn't reading that properly. So what's important to note is that it's an acid. When you combine the acid and the base, they react to one another. And what I'd like for you to do is get some white vinegar and some baking soda and put about a tablespoon of baking soda in a clear glass or jar, and then add about a tablespoon of white vinegar to that, and watch what happens. You will see a chemical reaction. This chemical reaction happens in the cake as well, because it has the two ingredients in the baking powder. The cornstarch is actually non-reactive to the batter at all. What it does is it coats each particle of acid and bicarbonate and the monocalcium phosphate, and helps keep them separated so that your powder is powder and not a big hard clump. If you look at powdered sugar, read the ingredients on a bag of powdered sugar. You'll see sugar and cornstarch. And the cornstarch is just there to keep the the sugar particles from sticking together. Next time you go to the store, grab one of the bags of shredded cheddar cheese and look at its ingredients, and you will see cheese and cornstarch. So they use it in a lot of places to help keep things separated. It's a drying agent. It absorbs liquid very well. So it's used as a thickener in sauces and gravies. You can add it to gravy. And later on down the line, when we make curd, you'll see we'll be using cornstarch to thicken up that curd. So cornstarch does come from corn, and it has a lot of different uses. But for the baking powder, it's just to keep the powders dry. It just dries them out and keeps them from sticking together. In fact, a lot of baby powder is made from cornstarch as well, the old style ones. So that's all very interesting things that why corn is one of the most important crops in our country. It's used everywhere. Now, in some recipes, you'll see baking powder and baking soda together. And that is usually because there's another acidic ingredient in the batter that in the baking powder, the acid and base are busy working together to create that aeration reaction. So we need to add a little extra baking soda to neutralize the acid in our added ingredient. In my case, it's this pumpkin. The pH level of a pumpkin is very low, therefore it is an acid. And that can cause issues in the recipe. So we add a little extra baking soda because of that. I don't really know why baking soda is always in chocolate chip cookies. The only thing I can think of is that by itself, it can be slightly aerating, but not as much as baking powder. When you add baking powder to cookie dough, you get a more cake type cookie. They're fluffier and thicker. Whereas with just baking soda, you wind up with that more flat and either crispy or chewy cookie. So it somehow by itself in the chocolate chip cookie will create a small reaction to most likely keep the cookie from being super hard and dense. One's chocolate chip cookies without baking soda are probably very crispy. So it just keeps them a little softer and gooier, reacting most likely with the flour or something to that effect. But we don't want, cakey cookies. We like chewy cookies, so we don't add the baking powder. So anyway, that is it for today. Let me know what you find out about the vinegar and baking soda reaction. And when you do that, keep in mind that that is what's happening inside your cake as it's baking, just on a much smaller scale. It's not one, just so intense. It's spread out throughout the batter, so it's little small reactions instead of one big one. But yeah, just let me know what you think about that. And like I said, we'll do some pH tests later on down the line. But for now, that's it. And I hope you enjoyed learning about baking powder and baking soda.